Welcome to Bridge City Church, a community of worshippers bridging hope locally and beyond. We pray this message encourages you.
Because today we're going to talk about how awesome God is. So, the word awesome's sort of become fairly popular in our language, sometimes not used entirely as it was originally meant to be, but we still use it. And it's a good thing. So, its original use was it means something that causes us or induces awe, inspiring an overwhelming feeling of reverence, admiration, or fear. For example, you might say that the energy that's released by an atomic bomb is awesome. It does a lot of damage, can provides a lot of power, but in the same true sense of the word, our God is awesome. And I'll give you a spoiler alert. I'm going to tell some stories. Okay, so I'm going to tell some stories that I've told before. So if you've heard them before, just grin and bear it. Okay, yeah, bad luck. That's right. Okay. Perhaps you've all seen something in the past, experienced something that you thought was awesome. So let me tell you about something that I saw once that in my mind, was quite awesome. So before we lived in Murray Bridge, as I've said before, we used to live at Ceduna on the west coast, and I worked at a radio terminal with Telecom. And the whole countryside over there is relatively flat, but the hill where we were on was a bit bigger than all the others. And if you were standing on the hill, and if you look south, you could see the ocean. It was only maybe 4 or 5 kilometres away. If you look to the west, you could see the town of Ceduna. And if you look sort of southeast, if on a clear day, you could see the town of Smoky Bay. And all the rest was just sort of farmland around there, except to the north, you could actually see in the distance where the dog fence was, the dingo-proof fence. Because after that, the farmland ended and it was just scrub. And so one day, when we turned up at work, to my surprise especially, you want me to swap it?
Yes, please.
Oh. They look the same to me. All right. So when we turned up at work, there was, on the east side, there was this mountain range. It had appeared. It was huge. It was awesome. You could see trees on it. You could see buildings. You could see roads. And I'm looking at it, and my workmates got out of the car and said, "Oh, it's a mirage." And they walked inside. But I'd never seen, you hear about mirages, but I've never actually seen one. And it was, well, I said awesome, because some friends of ours I guess the best way to explain it is, when we're looking at the world, normally if we're standing here, we can't see what's over here because of the curvature of the earth. But in this case, it was like the earth had curved up the other way. And although we were standing here, you could see what was over the horizon. And as I said, you could see roads, trees, buildings, whatever. And if you'd never been there before and I said to you, "That's a mountain range," you would have said yes for a few seconds until you realised that at the top it was fuzzy and then it suddenly dropped off over the ocean. These days we see light shows and all sorts of things happen, and where they've got a heap of drones, all working together and providing some sort of show. But this was a whole nother level. I've never seen anything like it since or before it. It was amazing. The words awe and fear are sometimes used in the New Testament to describe people's reaction to Jesus. He was performing miracles, healings, raising the dead on occasions, feeding thousands of people all at the one time, calming storms, doing all sorts of stuff. And people were kind of maybe overwhelmed by all this because it was outside their previous experience. Like we've never seen do anything like this before. And I remember once we had an evangelist here who was performing some signs and wonders in our church, and we were looking out and thinking, wow, haven't seen this before. But you see, Jesus was doing stuff that was amazing to the people, and it was sort of outside their control. They could only look on. And I guess that because they are looking at what is that's why the New Testament says that they were afraid, people were afraid and filled with awe. These days, we don't usually use the words like fear and awe when we describe our relationship with God, do we? Because we've perhaps tamed him down and we see him now as being sort of more warm and fuzzy, someone who accepts us in unconditionally. And that's true. God does accept us unconditionally when we put our faith in Jesus as our Saviour. But our response to this encounter should be transformational. We should be changing as we get to know God, because it should awaken like an awareness in us of what God is really like. It's sort of what Robin was struggling with a moment ago. It should awaken us to the awesomeness of God, because after all, we've now got a relationship with him. It should be the thing that causes change in us. Let's look at the experience of a prophet, Isaiah, and what happened to him, and of course was transformational for him. Let's read Isaiah chapter 6, verses 1 to 8. In the year that King Uzziah died, I saw the Lord high and exalted, seated on a throne, and the train of his robe filled the temple. Above him were seraphim, each with 6 wings. With 2 wings they covered their faces, with 2 they covered their feet, and with the other 2 they were flying. And they were calling to one another, Holy, holy, holy is the Lord Almighty. The whole earth is full of his glory. At the sound of their voices, the doorposts and the threshold shook, and the temple was filled with smoke. Woe to me, I cried, I'm ruined, for I'm a man of unclean lips, and I live among a people of unclean lips, and my eyes have seen the King, the Lord Almighty. Then one of the seraphim flew to me with a live coal in his hand, which he'd taken with tongs from the altar. And with it he touched my mouth and said, See, this has touched your lips. Your guilt is taken away, and your sin is atoned for. Then I heard the voice of the Lord saying, Whom shall I send, and who will go for us? And I said, Here am I, send me. We're told that Isaiah had this transformational encounter in the year that King Uzziah had died, which is approximately 740 BC. And King Uzziah's reign there in Judah had been relatively peaceful, and the people had experienced independence. But there was trouble on the horizon, because at the same year that King Uzziah died, or same time, Tiglath-Pileser III became king of the mighty Assyrian Empire, and he started a period of aggressive expansion in which he tried to absorb all the smaller states in Syria and what we now call Palestine. From then on, in Isaiah's lifetime, the kingdoms of Israel and Judah lived under the threat of Assyrian invasion. So it was in this time of regional instability that Isaiah encounters a holy God. And I've probably said this before, I'm always fascinated by the fact that although Isaiah saw God, he makes no attempt to describe what God actually looks like, which we'd all like to know, wouldn't we? Other people like Adam, Enoch, Noah, and Elijah all saw God but didn't write about it. It's as if their reverence for God was so great, there was no human language to describe his awesome appearance. God is holy and awesome. In fact, anything we can imagine is completely, he's above anything that we can imagine, and he's completely free of evil and sin. To try and put I could talk about God's being awesome, but let's try and put some scale to it. I want to tell you some stories. In 1940, during the Second World War, the British Expeditionary Force that was in France could see that soldiers were about to be trapped and captured or killed by the Germans. Military leaders advising Winston Churchill thought that it might be possible to save maybe 20 to 30,000 soldiers. But that was just a fraction of those who were trapped in France near Dunkirk. And on May the 26th, 1940, in response to a call from King George VI, British churches held a national day of prayer as the British Army was trapped there at Dunkirk. The prayers were focused on national repentance, seeking divine intervention for the survival of the troops, and asking for God's protection. There were extraordinary scenes outside Westminster Abbey with people in long queues waiting to pray. And when I was researching this, I came across a photo that was in the papers then of Westminster Abbey, and there's this huge lines of people all waiting to go in to pray. I mentioned a moment ago that it was a time of regional instability when Isaiah saw the Lord. And it was in this time of war and instability that the British people looked to God and saw his power revealed. As the people prayed on its National Day of Prayer, two events immediately happened. First, a storm arose over the Dunkirk region and grounded all the aircraft of the Luftwaffe, which had been strafing and killing thousands on the beaches. And secondly, and this might seem like the opposite, a great calm descended on the English Channel, the like of which hadn't been seen for a generation. It was because of this channel calm coming at the precise moment when it was needed and lasting for the length of the whole evacuation that the tiny boats were able to sail across and rescue over 338,000 soldiers. And if you're thinking that, well, maybe that was just a coincidence, I should add that this was the first day of national prayer. I'd only ever knew of this one thing, but when I was researching it, it was followed by 6 more. So in total, there were 7 national days of prayer, and each of them had a significant impact on what was happening at the time. You can search it out online if you're interested in finding out what else happened. The collective and urgent prayers were, in the minds of many people at the time, a contributing factor to the miraculous evacuation of over 38,000 troops, not just 20 to 30,000, as was originally considered. And many at the time saw it as a God-given miracle. In fact, if you search on, evacuation Dunkirk, it actually says, it comes up with miraculous evacuation, even though it's not written in a Christian sense. From about the mid-1970s, we spent 9 years living in Queensland. Starting in the late 1970s, there was a serious drought that lasted until 1983. In late 1979, Sir Joh Bjelke-Petersen, who was the Premier of Queensland, wrote to all the Christian churches in Queensland asking them to pray for rain on what I think from memory was the last Sunday in 1979. Christians prayed and it rained all over Queensland on that one day, right? It was never publicly acknowledged in the newspapers, but the Christians who prayed all knew and saw it as a miraculous event. right? And I'll say, if you search for this, you can't find anything about it in the papers, but I know. As I mentioned earlier, when Jesus was preaching and teaching, and, he was performing miraculous things, people had this overwhelming sense of awe because of what they were seeing was outside their previous experience. It was unexplainable to them. But Jesus wasn't just there for big events, such as calming storms and feeding multitudes. He was also giving attention to the needs of ordinary people. A few weeks back, when I led communion, I spoke of Jesus and a crowd of followers coming to a small town called Nain. Nain was this small town up in a valley, and there was only one road in and out of there. Let's read from Luke chapter 7, verses 11 to 17. Soon afterward, Jesus went to a town called Nain, and his disciples and a large crowd went along with him. As he approached the town gate, a dead person was being carried out, the only son of his mother, and she was a widow. And a large crowd from the town was with her. And when the Lord saw her, his heart went out to her, and he said, "Don't cry." Then he went up and touched the bier they were carrying him on, and the bearer stood still. He said, "Young man, I say to you, get up." The dead man sat up and began to talk, and Jesus gave him back to his mother. They were all filled with awe and praised God. "A great prophet has appeared among us," they said. "God has come to help his people." And this news about Jesus spread throughout Judea and the surrounding country. At first glance, it might seem that Jesus didn't need to raise this young man from the dead. And I'm saying that because usually when people came to Jesus, they came asking for healing, or family members would come on the sick person's behalf. But on this occasion, nobody requested Jesus' help. Nain was out of the way, so maybe no one recognized who Jesus was. They may have known about him, but no one knew him. So that being so, why did Jesus raise this young man back to life? And I think the answer is to be found in his mother's tears. Because in those days there was, as I probably said before, there was no Centrelink or old age pension to fall back on. If you were old and unable to work, then it was your son's responsibility to look after you, especially a mother who was widowed. So this woman, who was a widow, had lost her only son and was now facing, I guess, a bleak future. Her grief and her tears were heartfelt, and those tears got Jesus' attention. And maybe we should point out that our tears, it would seem, carry weight when we're bringing our requests to God. If you look at Job chapter 16, verses 19 to 21, says, "Even now my witness is in heaven. My advocate is on high. My intercessor is my friend. And as my eyes pour out tears to God, on behalf of a man, he pleads with God, and as one pleads for a friend." Job was going through a desperate time, and he was pouring out his tears before God. He apparently knew that tears carry weight in the courts of heaven, and it was the tears that made his case before God. And in the end, we see that it was justified. If we zoom over to Job 42:10, it tells us how this worked out. It says, "After Job had prayed for his friends, the Lord restored his fortunes and gave him twice as much as he had before." So as we stay faithful to God during our times of testing, if you've cried tears or maybe your heart's been broken, they speak on your behalf because God looks to our heart. So coming back to the widow, we see that her tears had caught Jesus' attention, and compassion, and he tells her, cry no more. When Jesus told the woman to cry no more, he was declaring, I guess, into her that her tears were sufficient. Heaven had heard, and the evidence of her tears had reached the throne. The next thing that happens is that Jesus touches the coffin and halts the procession. And you might say that Jesus wasn't just stopping the procession, he's also stopping the death process. However, once the death process is stopped, resurrection needs to flow. Jesus then spoke and awakened the young man, and the actual Greek word, which I decided not to put in here, means something like not just arise, but awake, wake up, get control of your senses. So Jesus has spoken to him and awoken him, and he sat up and began speaking. And Luke doesn't tell us what he was speaking about, but it would, if he had seen into the spiritual realm, then it would have, I'm sure it would have been something that would have got everybody's attention, because he would have had a revelation that he wanted to share. This new resurrection life was now in him, and it was obvious to all who were there and looking on. When we give our hearts to Jesus, this same resurrection power begins to flow in us, and we begin to live our lives from a fresh point of revelation of how awesome God is. The last thing we're told about this young man is that Jesus presented him back to his mother alive, and she was no doubt filled with joy, because now she was not going home alone. She was going home with her living son, all because they encountered and intersected with Jesus at the city gate. His resurrection life had restored what seemed to be permanently lost. And I guess as an aside, that's part of Jesus' nature. He desires to give us back the hopes and the dreams we once had and that we thought were permanently gone. He is the God of resurrection. Perhaps the most prominent resurrection of Jesus' ministry was the raising of his friend Lazarus from the dead. Mary and Martha, the sisters of Lazarus, had sent Jesus a message telling him, Lord, the one you love is sick. And it's implied that this sickness was serious, and that's why they were contacting him. It's because they wanted Jesus to come and to heal him. However, Jesus stayed there where he was for 2 more days before he travelled to Bethany, where Lazarus and his sisters lived. Let's read John 11, 20 to 44. It's rather a long passage, but we kind of need it. When Martha heard that Jesus was coming, this is when he finally arrived, she went to meet him. But Mary stayed at home. Lord, Martha said to Jesus, if you'd been here, my brother would not have died. But I know that even now God will give you whatever you ask. And Jesus said to her, your brother will rise again. And Martha answered, I know that he'll rise again in the resurrection at the last day. And Jesus said to her, I am the resurrection and the life. The one who believes in me will live even though they die, and whoever lives by believing in me will never die. Do you believe that? Yes, Lord, she replied. I believe that you are the Messiah, the Son of God, who is to come into the world. After she said this, she went back and called her sister Mary aside. The teacher is here, she said, asking for you. When Mary heard this, she got up quickly and went to him. Now, Jesus had not yet entered the village, but she was still at the place where Martha had met him. When the Jews who had been with Mary in the house, comforting her, noticed how quickly she got up and went out, they followed her, supposing that she was going to the tomb to mourn there. When Mary reached the place where Jesus was and saw him, she fell at his feet and said, "Lord," you can guess it, "if you were here, my brother would not have died." When Jesus saw her weeping and the Jews who had come along with her also weeping, he was deeply moved in spirit and troubled. "Where have you laid him?" he asked. "Come and see, Lord," they replied. Jesus wept. Therefore the Jews said, "See how he loved him." But some of them said, "Could not he who opened the eyes of the blind man have kept this man from dying?" Jesus, once more, deeply moved, came to the tomb. It was a cave with a stone laid across the entrance. "Take away the stone," he said. "But Lord," said Martha, the sister of the dead man, "by this time there is a bad odour, for he has been there for 4 days." Then Jesus said, "Did I not tell you that if you believe, you will see the glory of God?" So they took away the stone. Then Jesus looked up and said, "Father, I thank you that you've heard me. I knew that you always hear me, but I said this for the benefit of the people standing here, that they may believe that you sent me." And when he had said this, Jesus called out in a loud voice, "Lazarus, come forth, come out." The dead man came out, his hands and feet wrapped with strips of linen and with a cloth around his face. And Jesus said to them, "Take off the grave clothes and let him go." In his book, Resurrection and Revival, Robert Henderson makes some interesting observations about this event, and I'm going to share some of them with you. You see, so we see that when Jesus arrived, Lazarus had been dead for 4 days, been in the tomb 4 days. And the significance of this is that the Jews believed that when someone died, their spirit sort of stayed in the earth realm for 3 days after death. So they would have believed that after 4 days, Lazarus' spirit would have departed into eternity. There was a finality about it. There was going to be no return. Interestingly, when Jesus arrived to raise Lazarus, he didn't rush into it, because we see there was a process that he moved through to bring about the resurrection. The first thing that Jesus did before raising Lazarus was to move his sister Martha from hope to faith. When Martha met up with Jesus, she expressed a confidence that nothing was impossible for Jesus. And in verses 21 to 24, she's indicating that she thought there was something Jesus could still do. So she seems to be expressing hope that even now that Jesus can resurrect Lazarus. But then a moment later, when Jesus confirms that Lazarus will be raised, she states that this will only happen when the dead are resurrected on the last day, right? So she's clearly torn in a deep struggle with her faith. On the one hand, she's got faith, but on the other hand, there's hope, right? So much of us are like this. We want to believe, yet the logic and the reality of our situation seems impossible. And this is what Jesus was about to deal with in Martha. As the oldest sister, she's the matriarch and must come into agreement with Jesus for this miracle to occur. First, Martha has to move from hope in the future to faith in the present moment. All right, I'll say that again. She's got to move, because when we're living out, have hope, it's hope for something to happen in the future. But she's got to move from believing that something can happen in the future to believing that something can happen right now in the present. We all, I guess we all have this hope in us for the future, and that brings us comfort. But faith, on the other hand, is confidence that God will do do things in the present moment with our agreement in it. Let me show you a couple of scriptures. Romans 8:24-25 is a very good reference for the nature of hope. For we were saved in this hope. But hope that is seen is not hope. For why does one still hope for what he sees? But if we hope for what we do not see, we eagerly wait for it with perseverance. Note that hope creates perseverance as we wait for the fullness of the promise to manifest. Right? This is awesome. We all need hope. However, hope is not the dimension where miracles happen. Miracles happen through faith. Remember, hope is believing in what will happen in the future. And this was where Martha was. At best, she was vacillating between hope and faith. One moment she's saying she knows God could do whatever Jesus asks, but then, and that's faith, but then the next moment she's back to declaring that her brother would be raised on the last day, which is in the future. We've got to move from hope to faith. Hebrews 11 verses 1 and also in verse 6 tells us what faith is. Now, faith is the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not seen. But without faith, it's impossible to please him, for he who comes to God must believe that he is, and that he is the rewarder of those who diligently seek him. In both of these verses, faith is described as being in the present tense, right? Not in past tense or future tense, but present tense. Faith is the possession of what we're hoping for. This means that real faith actually springs from the realm of faith, from the realm of hope. So we've got to have hope first, but it's got to move on to faith. And this is why hope is necessary for us. We can never have real faith in the moment if we aren't filled with hope. And Martha had this, at least. Faith is the substance that we are hoping for. Out of our hope, faith can result. Right? A moment ago I read Hebrews 11:6, which declares that, and without faith it's impossible to please God, because everyone who comes to him must believe that he exists and that he rewards those who earnestly seek him. This doesn't mean that we just believe that God exists. It means that we have a present revelation of God at the time. It's more a reality. This allows us to come to him. He is the one who rewards our diligent search for him. What motivates this is a real present tense faith. We have a revelation of God that bursts in us the willingness to take a risk and believe in him in the moment. And this is what Jesus is endeavoring to do with Martha. She had to move from hope into real faith. And to accomplish this, Jesus released a revelation of who he was to her. Because sometimes he was a bit careful about what he told people. But in John 11:23-25, we saw Jesus declaring to her who he presently was in the situation. See, Jesus said to her, I am the resurrection and the life. He who believes in me, though he may die, he shall live. Notice that Jesus is moving her from hope to faith. He reveals himself not as the one who performs resurrection, but as the resurrection and life itself. This revelation and awareness of who Jesus is births faith to agree with him for resurrection to occur. And that, a resurrection of stuff in our own lives. It's a revelation of who he is that moves us from hope, from the hope realm to the realm of faith. It moves us from just a confidence in him for the future to a present-day confidence for the supernatural to occur. As Jesus prepared to raise Lazarus from the dead, he commanded that the stone covering the tomb of Lazarus be removed. And once again, it shows Martha vacillating in her faith. Jesus said, "Take away the stone." And Martha, the sister of him who was dead, said to him, "Lord, by this time there is a stench," because he's been there for 4 days. This was the moment when Martha had to move into faith from hope. She had to allow the stone to be rolled away. The resurrection of Lazarus couldn't happen until the stone was rolled away. The stone, you might say, was a blockage. And if we're seriously looking to move forward in our faith, we'll face this moment. Just like Martha, we have to be willing to roll away that blockage that's in our life and be prepared to face the possible stench that might come with it. It might be the stench of ridicule, the stench of failure, the stench of shame. The risk of facing the stench that comes with failure is the price that we've got to pay before God can bring new life to us. Our willingness to believe God, that he might bring to us his resurrection power, is necessary. Our God is an awesome God who can not only change the weather during wars and droughts, but he's also a God who loves us and can change the various facets of our lives. This awesome God of the universe loves you and wants to work with you in your problems, in the problems that you face. He wants to move you from hope in the future to faith in the present. It's time to roll away those problems in your life, those stones, like the problems that are like stones in your life, and call for resurrection. It will mean risking a stench, but Jesus has plainly told us that he is the resurrection, not one who performs resurrection, but is the resurrection and the life itself. So what I want to say to you today is, if you haven't given your heart and your life to Jesus, but you'd like forgiveness and resurrection power in your life, then don't put it off. Today is the day to do it. If there's a fire burning in in here right now, and you haven't known that before, then step out and in a moment come to the front. If you're too shy, get someone to come with you. As the service comes to an end, come and talk to me or to one of the leaders, and we will introduce you to Jesus.
Thanks for tuning into this message. You can stay up to date with our latest content by subscribing to our channel. For more information, head to our website at bridgecitychurch.com.au.